Close your eyes now and let me take you on the longest journey ever made. Not a journey measured in miles, though we will cover tens of thousands of those. Not a journey measured in years, though we will span 100,000 of them. This is the journey of your ancestors, the walk that brought humanity from a single point in Africa to every habitable corner of this planet. From tropical rainforests to frozen tundras, from scorching deserts to remote islands, from sea level to the highest plateaus where the air itself grows thin. This is the story of how we spread across the earth, step by step, generation by generation, until there was nowhere left to go. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. Tokyo at sunrise, London at midnight, Sydney in the afternoon, Sao Paulo at twilight. All of us connected across time zones, descendants of the same travellers, inheritors of the same journey, falling asleep to the same ancient story. If this helped you sleep, consider subscribing. I release new sleep stories regularly, exploring human history from prehistory to the present. Sleep well, wherever you are. Sweet dreams, Walker. And it all started in one place, in the warm heart of Africa, perhaps 300,000 years ago, when the first humans who looked like you and me opened their eyes on a world they would eventually inherit completely. Picture that world now, so different from ours and yet the same planet, the same sun rising and setting, the same stars wheeling overhead at night. Africa then was not so different from Africa now in its basic geography, though the climate shifted and pulsed with rhythms we're only beginning to understand. There were savannas and forests, mountains and rivers, coastlines and deserts. And somewhere in that vast continent a small population of humans lived and died, hunted and gathered, loved and fought and raised their children, never knowing that their descendants would one day walk on the moon. They were us, these first modern humans. If you could travel back in time and meet one, you would recognize them immediately. The same body proportions, the same facial features, the same hands and feet and eyes. Their brains were the same size as yours, wired the same way, capable of the same thoughts and feelings and dreams. They laughed and cried and wondered about the world. They made tools and built shelters and told stories around fires that pushed back the darkness. They were human in every way that matters. But their world was small. Not physically small, Africa is enormous, but small in terms of human occupation. There may have been only tens of thousands of them, perhaps fewer, scattered across the continent in small bands that rarely encountered strangers. They knew their territories intimately, every water source, every seasonal food, every danger. They had no concept of the wider world, no knowledge that other continents existed, no dream of distant shores. Their universe was what they could walk to in a lifetime, and that was enough. It had to be enough. For tens of thousands of years, this was the human condition. Small groups, local knowledge, lives bounded by the horizon. The world beyond Africa was empty of humanity, waiting, though no one knew it was waiting. The stage was set for the greatest migration in the history of life on Earth, but the actors did not yet know their roles. And then something changed. We do not know exactly what triggered it. Perhaps the climate shifted, pushing humans toward new territories. Perhaps populations grew until familiar lands could no longer support everyone. Perhaps curiosity, that distinctively human trait, simply drove some individuals to see what lay beyond the next hill, and then the next, and then the next after that. Whatever the cause, humans began to move, not quickly, not deliberately, not with any grand plan or destination in mind. Just the slow generational drift of people following resources, following opportunities, following the restless urge that would eventually carry our species to the ends of the earth. The first steps were small. A band moves to a new valley because the hunting is better there. Their children grow up knowing that valley as home, and when they have children of their own, some of those children move a little further, to a river they discovered while exploring, to a coastline where shellfish are abundant. Each generation extends the range slightly, and over thousands of years those slight extensions add up to enormous distances. This is how humans colonized Africa first, spreading from their point of origin to fill the entire continent. From the tropical forests of the Congo to the Mediterranean coast, from the Atlantic shores to the highlands of Ethiopia, humans walked and settled and adapted. They developed different cultures, different tools, different ways of exploiting their local environments. They became the diverse African populations whose descendants still live on that continent today. But Africa, vast as it is, was just the beginning. The world was so much bigger, and humans were just getting started. Let me tell you about the first great exodus, the journey out of Africa that would eventually lead to you. Picture the map in your mind. Africa connects to Asia through a narrow land bridge at its northeastern corner where Egypt meets the Sinai Peninsula. This is the door, the gateway through which humans would eventually pour into the wider world. But there is another possible route, one that many researchers now think was equally or more important. Look south along the African coast, down past the Horn of Africa, where Somalia juts out into the Indian Ocean. Across a narrow strait lies the Arabian Peninsula, and beyond that, all of Asia. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, they call it, the Gate of Tears. Today it is a busy shipping lane, connecting the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. But in the deep past, when ice ages locked up water in massive glaciers and sea levels dropped, this strait became even narrower, perhaps as narrow as a few miles, narrow enough to see the other side, narrow enough to wonder what was over there, narrow enough perhaps to cross. Imagine the first humans to make that crossing whenever it happened. They may not have known they were leaving Africa. They may not have understood that they were entering a new continent. They were just following the coast, as humans had done for countless generations, harvesting shellfish and fish and whatever else the sea provided. The coastline curved, and they followed it. They did not realize they were walking into a new chapter of human history. Once across, they found themselves in Arabia, a land that was sometimes green and hospitable, sometimes harsh and unforgiving, depending on the climate cycles that pulsed through deep time. When the monsoons reached Arabia, it bloomed with life, and humans could thrive there. When the monsoons retreated, Arabia became the desert we know today, and humans either died or moved on. This climate pump may have been crucial to human migration. During wet periods, humans could expand into and through Arabia. During dry periods, they were pushed onward, forced to find new lands or perish. The desert was both barrier and motivator, blocking the way home while pushing pioneers forward into unknown territories. From Arabia, the path split. Some humans followed the coast eastward, beginning an epic journey along the shores of the Indian Ocean that would eventually take their descendants all the way to Australia. Others turned north, moving into the Levant, the region we now call Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. From there, they could spread into Europe, into Central Asia, into the vast interior of the Asian continent. Both paths were taken. Both paths led to new worlds. Let me follow the southern route first, because it may have been the earlier one, and because it leads to one of the most remarkable achievements in human prehistory, the colonization of Australia. Picture yourself walking along a coastline. The sea is on your right, sparkling in the tropical sun. On your left, the land rises toward mountains you will never climb. You do not need to climb them. The coast provides everything you need. Shellfish in the tidal pools, fish in the shallow waters, plants and small game along the shore. You walk a little further each day or each week or each month. There is no hurry. You're not trying to get anywhere in particular. You are simply living, as your parents lived, as your grandparents lived. But unlike them, you're living in a place where no human has ever been before. The southern coastal route took humans from Arabia along the shores of what is now Iran, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia. Thousands of miles of coastline, hundreds of generations of slow expansion. The walk itself probably took tens of thousands of years, though humans were not consciously walking anywhere. They were simply living their lives, and their lives happened to move gradually eastward along the richest ecological zone on the planet, the tropical coastline. Think about what that coastline offered. Warm weather year-round, so no need for the complex clothing and shelter required in colder climates. Abundant seafood, a protein source that never migrated away or hid from hunters. Fresh water flowing down from the mountains at regular intervals. Vegetation that produced fruit and nuts throughout the year. It was, in many ways, an ideal environment for human expansion, a highway of plenty that led from Africa to the far side of the world. The humans who took this route adapted to coastal life. They became skilled at harvesting the sea. They may have developed watercraft of some kind, simple rafts or canoes that allowed them to fish further from shore, to cross river mouths and small straits. These skills would eventually prove crucial when they reached the end of the continental coastline and faced a more formidable crossing, because eventually the coastline ran out. The continental shelf of Asia ends in what is now Indonesia, and beyond it lies the deep water of the Timor Sea, and beyond that, Australia. Even at the lowest sea levels during the Ice Ages, when you could walk from mainland Asia to Borneo and Bali, there was always open water between the Asian continental shelf and the Australian continental shelf. At minimum 50 miles of open ocean. Probably more, no land visible on the other side, no certainty that land existed at all, and yet humans crossed. Somehow, at least 65,000 years ago, and possibly earlier, humans got to Australia. This is one of the most astonishing facts in human prehistory. Other expansions can be explained by people simply walking, following land routes, crossing land bridges exposed by low sea levels. Australia is different. Getting to Australia required boats. It required navigation. It required the courage or desperation to set out across open water, with no guarantee of finding anything on the other side. We do not know exactly how they did it. The boats, whatever they were, have not survived. The people who built them left no records, no images, no descriptions for us to study. We only know that they succeeded because their descendants, the Aboriginal Australians, have lived on that continent continuously for over 65,000 years. The longest continuous culture in human history began with a sea crossing that seems almost impossible given the technology of the time. Perhaps they followed birds, noticing that certain species flew in a consistent direction and reasoning that they must be going somewhere. Perhaps they saw smoke from natural fires on the distant shore, though Australia would have been over the horizon from any point on the Asian side. Perhaps they were simply exploring, island hopping through the Indonesian archipelago, pushing a little further each time until one day they found themselves on a coast that went on forever, the shore of a new continent. Whatever their method, their achievement was extraordinary. They colonized a continent the size of the continental United States, adapting to environments ranging from tropical rainforest to harsh desert to alpine mountains. They developed technologies and cultures perfectly suited to Australian conditions, technologies and cultures that sustained them through ice ages and climate shifts and everything else nature threw at them, until Europeans arrived and disrupted a way of life that had persisted for over 2,000 generations. But that is another story. Tonight we are focused on the walking, the spreading, the incredible journey that carried humans from Africa to every corner of the globe. And while some humans were making their way to Australia, others were taking a different path. Let me take you back now to that branch in the road, back to Arabia where the coastline pointed both east and north. Some humans turned north. They walked into the Levant, into the lands of the eastern Mediterranean. This was not a new territory for humans. There is evidence that earlier waves of human migration had reached the Levant long before, perhaps 100,000 years ago or more. But those earlier migrations did not persist. They died out or retreated, leaving the region empty of our species until a later wave arrived and stayed. The Levant was the crossroads of the ancient world, the bridge between Africa and Eurasia. From there, humans could spread in any direction, west into Europe, north into Central Asia, east into the heart of the Asian continent. And over the following tens of thousands of years, they did all of these things. The expansion into Europe was not easy. Europe during the Ice Ages was a challenging environment, cold and harsh, with glaciers covering much of the north. But it was not empty. Another species of human had been living there for hundreds of thousands of years, the Neanderthals. We know the Neanderthals as our closest relatives, as the most successful human species besides our own, as the people who adapted brilliantly to Ice Age Europe and survived there through climate cycles that would have killed lesser beings. They were not primitive brutes, despite their reputation. They made sophisticated tools, buried their dead, cared for their sick and injured, and may have had language and art and religion. They were human in every meaningful sense, just a different kind of human than us. When our ancestors arrived in Europe, they encountered the Neanderthals. What happened next is still debated, but the evidence suggests it was complicated. There was competition, certainly. Two intelligent, tool-using species competing for the same resources in the same territory. That competition may have been violent at times, though we have no direct evidence of warfare between the species. But there was also interbreeding. We know this because Neanderthal DNA lives on in most people alive today. If your ancestors came from anywhere outside of sub-Saharan Africa, you probably carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA in your genome. This means our ancestors and Neanderthals did not just compete. They also mated, had children together, raised those children. The two species merged to some degree, even as one was replacing the other. The Neanderthals disappeared around 40,000 years ago, give or take. We do not know exactly why. Perhaps competition with our ancestors was too intense. Perhaps climate change affected them differently than it affected us. Perhaps accumulated disadvantages over thousands of years simply added up until the population could no longer sustain itself. Whatever the cause, they vanished from the earth, leaving only their genes in our bodies and their tools in our archaeological sites. With the Neanderthals gone, our ancestors had Europe to themselves. They spread across the continent, from the Atlantic coast to the Ural Mountains, from the Mediterranean to the edge of the glaciers that still covered Scandinavia. They developed the Upper Paleolithic cultures that produced the famous cave paintings of Lascaux and Altamira, the carved figurines and decorated tools that show such remarkable artistic skill. They were fully human in every way we can measure, and they were thriving in a world that was still harsh, but was now entirely theirs. Meanwhile, other branches of humanity were pushing into Central Asia, into the vast grasslands and mountains that stretch from the Black Sea to China. This was challenging territory, cold in winter, hot in summer, with few trees and variable water sources. But humans adapted. They developed new ways of hunting the large herbivores that roamed the steppes: horses, bison, mammoths. They created warm clothing from animal hides, shelters from mammoth bones and skins. They survived, and more than survived, they flourished. The Central Asian expansion eventually connected with the East Asian populations that had arrived earlier via the southern coastal route. For tens of thousands of years, these populations had been separated, evolving in isolation, developing their own cultures and physical characteristics. Now they met again, and there was gene flow between them, cultural exchange, the mingling of traditions that had diverged long ago. But the expansion was not over. Far to the north, beyond the steppes, beyond the mountains, lay Siberia. And beyond Siberia, connected to it by a land bridge that appeared when sea levels dropped, lay a continent where no human had ever walked: the Americas. The colonization of Siberia was itself a remarkable achievement. This is one of the most extreme environments on Earth, with winter temperatures that drop to 60 or 70 degrees below zero, with months of near-total darkness, with challenges to survival that would seem insurmountable to most humans today. But our ancestors adapted. They developed clothing so sophisticated that it allowed them to maintain body temperature in conditions that would kill an unprotected person in minutes. They learned to hunt the animals that lived there: woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, reindeer, horses. They built shelters that could withstand the brutal cold. They created cultures rich in art and ritual, cultures that found meaning and beauty even in the harshest conditions. The archaeological record shows humans in Siberia at least 45,000 years ago, possibly earlier. They were not numerous, but they were present, clinging to existence at the edge of the habitable world, and some of them kept pushing north and east, following game, following opportunity, perhaps simply following the human urge to see what lies beyond the horizon. Until one day, without knowing it, they crossed into a new world. The Bering Land Bridge connected Asia to North America during the Ice Ages, when so much water was locked up in glaciers that sea levels dropped by hundreds of feet. Where the Bering Strait now separates Russia from Alaska, there was then dry land, a wide plain covered in grass and shrubs, home to mammoths and other large animals. Crossing it was no more dramatic than crossing any other stretch of tundra. The humans who did it had no idea they were entering a new continent. They were just following the same way of life that had sustained them for generations. But once across, they found themselves in the Americas, a pair of continents that stretched from the Arctic to the Antarctic, from Atlantic to Pacific, containing every imaginable environment and ecosystem. Mountains and deserts, forests and grasslands, tropical jungles and frozen tundras, and all of it empty of humans, all of it waiting to be explored and settled and filled. The colonization of the Americas is one of the most debated topics in archaeology. When did humans arrive? How did they spread? What routes did they take? These questions are still being answered, and new discoveries regularly force us to revise our understanding. But the broad outline is clear. Humans were in the Americas by at least 15,000 years ago, and possibly much earlier. Some researchers argue for human presence 20 or even 30,000 years ago, based on controversial evidence that other researchers dispute. The debate continues, But no one doubts that humans eventually spread throughout both continents, from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific Islands. Think about what that means. People who had lived their entire lives in the Arctic tundra eventually had descendants who lived in the tropical rainforests of Brazil. People who hunted mammoths on the frozen steppe eventually had descendants who hunted jaguars in the Amazon. The same species, the same basic biology, adapted to every possible environment through culture and technology and sheer human ingenuity. The routes of expansion through the Americas are still being mapped. The traditional view was that humans came through an ice-free corridor that opened between the glaciers covering Canada, allowing them to walk from Alaska into the interior of North America. But recent evidence suggests that a coastal route may have been earlier and more important, with humans following the Pacific coast southward, harvesting marine resources along the way, much as their distant ancestors had done along the coasts of the Indian Ocean. Perhaps both routes were used. Perhaps different populations took different paths at different times. What we know for certain is that by about 13,000 years ago, humans were present throughout the Americas, from coast to coast and from north to south. They had completed the colonization of every major landmass on Earth except one. Let me return now to the Old World, because the story there was not finished either. While some humans were walking into the Americas, others were spreading into the last unoccupied corners of Asia and Europe, and still others were preparing for the next great challenge, the colonization of the remote islands of the Pacific. The expansion into the Pacific Islands is in some ways the most impressive of all human migrations, because it required the most advanced technology and the most sophisticated navigation skills. Getting to Australia required crossing perhaps 50 miles of open water. Getting to Polynesia required crossing thousands of miles, navigating by stars and currents and the flight patterns of birds, maintaining course for weeks at a time with no land in sight. The peoples who accomplished this, the ancestors of the Polynesians, were the greatest sailors the world had ever seen. They developed double-hulled canoes capable of ocean crossings, vessels that could carry dozens of people along with food, water, animals and plants for establishing new colonies. They developed navigation techniques that allowed them to find tiny islands in the vastness of the Pacific, techniques so sophisticated that modern scientists are still working to understand them fully. Starting from somewhere in Southeast Asia, these sailors spread outward into the Pacific over the course of several thousand years. They reached Fiji around 3,000 years ago, Samoa and Tonga shortly after, Hawaii around 1,500 years ago, New Zealand around 800 years ago. They found Easter Island, one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth, over 2,000 miles from the nearest population centre. They found every habitable island in an ocean that covers more area than all the continents combined. The Pacific expansion was the last great wave of human migration in prehistory. When it was complete, humans occupied virtually every place on Earth where human life was possible. From the frozen Arctic to the tropical Pacific, from the highest mountains to the smallest islands, we had spread everywhere, adapted to everything, become the most widespread large animal in the history of the planet, and we did it by walking. By putting one foot in front of the other, generation after generation for 100,000 years. By curiosity and necessity, by courage and desperation, by the simple human impulse to see what lies over the next hill. We walked out of Africa and into every corner of the world. Let me now take you through this journey more slowly, with more detail, so you can feel the texture of what your ancestors experienced. Let us start again in Africa, 300,000 years ago, and walk together through the story of human migration. The African continent where humanity was born is a place of stunning diversity: desert and rainforest, savanna and mountain, coastline and deep interior. Our earliest ancestors lived somewhere in this vastness, probably in eastern or southern Africa based on the current evidence, in small bands that knew nothing of the wider world. They were hunters and gatherers, living off the land, moving with the seasons and the animals they depended on. Their technology was already sophisticated by animal standards. Stone tools for cutting and scraping, wooden spears for hunting, fire for cooking, and warmth and protection. They had language, though we cannot know what it sounded like or how complex it was. They had culture, traditions passed from generation to generation, ways of doing things that defined their identity. They were fully human. What they did not have was numbers. The human population of Africa 300,000 years ago was tiny by modern standards, perhaps a few tens of thousands at most. They were scattered across the continent in isolated populations that rarely met, rarely exchanged genes, rarely shared ideas. This isolation allowed different populations to develop somewhat differently, accumulating genetic and cultural differences that we can still detect today in the diversity of African peoples. But isolation also made them vulnerable. Small populations can disappear entirely through bad luck, a disease, a drought, a single bad year when the rains fail and the game moves away. The early history of our species was probably marked by many such disappearances, local populations blinking out of existence, taking their particular variations and innovations with them. The survivors were the lucky ones, or perhaps the clever ones, or perhaps simply the ones who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Africa itself was not static during this period. The climate swung through cycles of wet and dry, sometimes making the Sahara green and habitable, sometimes expanding it into an impassable barrier. These cycles pumped human populations back and forth across the continent, sometimes isolating them, sometimes bringing them together. The rhythm of climate change was the rhythm of human history during this early period, driving the expansions and contractions that shaped our species. Eventually, some humans began to move beyond Africa. When and why they first left is still debated, but the evidence suggests multiple attempts over tens of thousands of years. The Levant, that bridge between Africa and Asia, shows signs of human presence going back well over 100,000 years. But these early forays did not succeed in the long run. The populations died out or retreated, leaving the region to the Neanderthals and other archaic humans who had lived there far longer. Why did these early migrations fail? We can only speculate. Perhaps the populations were too small to be viable in the long term. Perhaps they encountered diseases or competitors they could not overcome. Perhaps climate shifts made the region uninhabitable at crucial moments. Whatever the cause, humans did not successfully colonize the world beyond Africa until much later, perhaps around 70,000 years ago. Something happened around that time that changed everything. We do not know exactly what it was. Some researchers point to a possible population bottleneck, a period when human numbers dropped to dangerously low levels, perhaps due to a massive volcanic eruption that darkened the skies and cooled the climate. Others point to cultural or cognitive innovations that gave humans new advantages over their environment and their competitors. Still others suggest that the timing is simply coincidental, that humans had always been capable of global expansion, and finally happened to succeed after many previous failures. Whatever the cause, the result is clear. Beginning around 70,000 years ago, humans started a sustained expansion that would eventually carry them to every corner of the globe. This was not a single migration, but a complex process of movement and settlement, advance and retreat, spreading and consolidating, that played out over tens of thousands of years. Let me walk you through it stage by stage. The first major expansion was along the southern coast of Asia, the route I described earlier that led eventually to Australia. This was probably the fastest expansion route, because coastal environments are relatively uniform and productive. A population adapted to harvesting shellfish and catching fish can move along a coastline almost indefinitely, finding familiar resources in unfamiliar places. The rate of expansion along this route may have been surprisingly fast by prehistoric standards, perhaps reaching Australia within a few thousand years of leaving Africa. But fast is a relative term. A few thousand years is still 100 generations or more. Plenty of time for the migration to be imperceptible to those living through it. No individual ever thought of themselves as a pioneer, as an explorer, as someone pushing the boundaries of the human world. They were just living their lives, following the coast, doing what their parents had done before them. The discovery that their descendants would one day reach Australia would have seemed incomprehensible, if anyone could have explained it to them at all. The northern routes of expansion were slower and more difficult. Moving inland from the coast meant leaving behind the reliable resources of the sea and adapting to entirely different environments. Grasslands and forests, deserts and mountains, each required new skills, new tools, new ways of finding food and water and shelter. Populations that moved inland were taking risks, venturing into territories where failure was more likely and the consequences of failure were more severe. But some took those risks, and some succeeded. Over thousands of years, humans spread from the Levant into Europe, into Central Asia, into the heartland of the Asian continent. They encountered Neanderthals and probably other archaic human species, competed with them, interbred with them, eventually replaced them. They developed new technologies suited to new environments, better clothing for cold climates, better weapons for hunting different game, better shelters for surviving harsh winters. They became the diverse populations of Eurasia, the ancestors of most people alive today. The expansion into Europe was particularly challenging because Europe was in the grip of the Ice Ages. Glaciers covered Scandinavia and the Alps, and even the unglaciated regions experienced climates much harsher than today. Yet humans adapted. They developed the Upper Paleolithic cultures that we know from archaeology, sophisticated stone tools, bone and antler implements, art and ornament that speaks to rich symbolic lives. They hunted mammoths and reindeer, gathered whatever plants the harsh climate allowed, survived and even thrived in conditions that would challenge even modern humans with all our technology. The art they left behind is one of the great treasures of human history. The cave paintings of France and Spain, created 20 or 30 or 40,000 years ago, still have the power to move us today. Animals rendered with startling realism, hunting scenes full of motion and drama, abstract symbols whose meaning we can only guess at. These were not primitive people scratching idly on rocks. These were sophisticated artists working in a tradition that had developed over thousands of years, expressing ideas and visions that were important to their communities. What were they thinking, these ancient artists? What did the paintings mean to them? We will never know for certain, but we can guess that they were grappling with the same big questions that humans have always grappled with. Why are we here? What happens when we die? What is our relationship to the animals we hunt and the world we live in? The paintings may have been religious or magical, attempts to ensure hunting success or to honour the spirits of the animals. They may have been educational, teaching young hunters about their prey. They may have been purely aesthetic, created for the joy of creation itself. Whatever their purpose, they show us that our ancestors were fully human, fully capable of symbolic thought and artistic expression, fully engaged with the mystery of existence. While some humans were creating art in European caves, others were pushing into ever more challenging environments. The colonization of Siberia brought humans to the edge of the habitable world, to a land of eternal winter and midnight sun, of permafrost and polar bears. The people who settled there developed ways of life that still astonish us today. They hunted mammoths, animals that weighed several tons and stood over 10 feet tall at the shoulder. They built shelters from mammoth bones and hides, structures large enough to house extended families through the long Arctic winter. They created art, including some of the oldest known figurative sculptures in the world. They survived generation after generation in conditions that would kill most modern humans within hours if we were unprepared. And some of them kept moving. The Arctic coast of Siberia leads eventually to the Bering Land Bridge and beyond it to Alaska. We do not know exactly when humans first made this crossing, but we know that they did. The earliest well-accepted evidence for humans in the Americas comes from around 15,000 years ago, but some sites suggest earlier presence, perhaps as early as 20 or 30,000 years ago. The debate continues, but what matters for our story is that humans eventually crossed from Asia to the Americas and began the colonization of the last unpeopled continents. Imagine the first humans to walk into the Americas. They did not know they were making history. They did not know they were entering a new world. They were simply following the animal herds across the tundra, as they had always done, as their ancestors had done for thousands of years. The land looked the same on both sides of the invisible line we now call the Bering Strait. The animals were the same: mammoths, horses, bison, caribou. The challenges were the same: cold, predators, the constant need to find food and water and shelter. There was no moment of discovery, no flag planted, no declaration made, just humans living their lives, oblivious to the significance of where they were. But once in the Americas, these populations began an expansion that would ultimately carry them to the tip of South America, over 10,000 miles from their point of entry. This expansion may have been remarkably fast. Some researchers estimate that humans could have spread from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego in as little as 1,000 years, a blink of an eye in evolutionary terms. Others argue for a slower spread, with populations lingering in favourable areas before pushing onward into new territories. Whatever the pace, the result was the same. Within a few thousand years of first arriving, humans occupied the entire length of the Americas. Think about the diversity of environments they encountered and adapted to along the way. Arctic tundra and temperate forests, the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains, tropical jungles and high-altitude plateaus, arid deserts, and lush coastlines. Each environment required different strategies, different tools, different ways of finding food and organizing society. The cultural diversity of the Americas at the time of European contact, the hundreds of distinct languages and lifestyles and traditions, all evolved from those original migrants who crossed from Siberia into a new world. The Americas were not the end of the human expansion, though they were close to it. The last major regions to be settled were the remote islands of the Pacific, colonized by the Polynesian sailors I mentioned earlier. This final expansion was different from everything that came before. It was not a matter of following coastlines or walking across land bridges. It was a deliberate, planned, technologically sophisticated project of exploration and colonization, carried out by people who knew exactly what they were doing. The Polynesian expansion began somewhere in Southeast Asia, among peoples who had already developed sophisticated sailing technology for navigating the complex waterways of island Southeast Asia. Over thousands of years, these people pushed outward into the Pacific, first into the nearer islands of Melanesia and Micronesia, then into the vast emptiness of Polynesia proper. They developed navigation techniques that allowed them to sail thousands of miles across open ocean with no instruments but their senses and their accumulated knowledge. They learned to read the stars, the ocean swells, the flight patterns of birds, the colour of the water, the feel of the currents. They could find tiny islands hundreds of miles from the nearest land, islands invisible over the horizon, islands they had never seen but knew must be there because of the signs nature provided. When they found new islands, they did not just settle them, they transformed them. They brought with them the plants and animals necessary for human life, taro and breadfruit, pigs and chickens, dogs and rats. They established gardens and orcharding systems, created complex societies with chiefs and priests and commoners, developed art and religion, and oral traditions rich enough to sustain cultures for generations. They made the Pacific Islands human places, places where people could live and thrive and build civilizations. The last major islands to be settled were Hawaii, New Zealand, and Easter Island, all reached within the last 1500 years. New Zealand in particular was remarkable. A large temperate landmass completely empty of humans until around 1280 CE, when Polynesian sailors arrived and established the Maori culture that still exists today. It was the last significant landmass on Earth to be colonized by humans, the final chapter in the long story of human expansion. By the time European explorers began their voyages of discovery in the 15th century, there was almost nowhere left to discover. Humans had beaten them to every continent except Antarctica, to every major island group, to every environment where human life was possible without modern technology. The European age of exploration was not the discovery of new worlds, but the reconnection of old ones, the closing of a circle that had been broken when our ancestors walked out of Africa 100,000 years ago. Let me step back now and consider what this great migration means for us today. What does it tell us about who we are and where we came from? What does it reveal about human nature and human potential? The first lesson is about adaptability. Humans are not specialists. We are not adapted to any particular environment or way of life. We are generalists, capable of surviving almost anywhere, of eating almost anything, of building societies in conditions ranging from tropical abundance to Arctic scarcity. This adaptability is our great strength as a species. It is why we spread so far and so fast, why we survived climate changes that drove other species to extinction, why we ultimately came to dominate the planet as no species had before. The source of this adaptability is culture. Unlike other animals, we do not need to evolve new physical features to adapt to new environments. We can change our behavior, our tools, our social organization. We can learn from each other, accumulate knowledge across generations, build on what came before. Culture is a form of inheritance that operates much faster than genetic inheritance, allowing us to adapt to new conditions in years or generations rather than millennia or millions of years. The second lesson is about diversity. The human migration created diversity. As populations spread into different environments and became isolated from each other, they developed different physical characteristics, different cultures, different languages. The human species today is remarkably diverse, both genetically and culturally, and that diversity is a direct product of our migratory history. It is something to celebrate, not to fear, because it represents the success of our species in adapting to every possible way of life. At the same time, the migration reminds us of our underlying unity. Despite all our differences, all humans alive today descend from the same small population that lived in Africa a few 100,000 years ago. We are all cousins, more closely related than the geographic distribution of our species would suggest. The genetic differences between human populations are minor compared to our similarities. The cultural differences, striking as they are, overlay a common human nature that we all share. We are one species, one family, scattered across the globe by the accidents of history, but united by our common ancestry. The third lesson is about time. The human migration took 100,000 years. That is a span of time almost impossible to comprehend. We measure our lives in decades, our history in centuries, our civilizations in millennia. 100,000 years contains 1,000 centuries, 10,000 generations, more human lives than we can possibly imagine. During all that time, our ancestors were walking, settling, adapting, creating. The world we inherited is the product of all that accumulated effort. All those countless lives lived and lost in the long march from Africa to everywhere. This perspective can be humbling or inspiring, depending on how you look at it. On one hand, it shows how small our individual lives are compared to the vast sweep of human history. On the other hand, it shows that great things can be accomplished through small steps, repeated over long periods. The people who colonized the world did not do it through heroic individual effort. They did it by living ordinary lives, raising children, passing on knowledge, moving a little further each generation. The extraordinary emerge from the accumulation of the ordinary, and that is perhaps the most hopeful lesson of all. The fourth lesson is about our relationship with the planet. The human migration was not just a movement of people, it was a transformation of the Earth itself. Wherever humans went, we changed the landscape. We hunted animals to extinction, burned forests, introduced new species, altered ecosystems. The world today is not the world that existed before humans spread across it. It is a human world shaped by human actions over tens of thousands of years. This is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is something we need to understand. We are not visitors to this planet, careful guests leaving no trace. We are a geological force capable of transforming environments on a global scale. The choices we make today will shape the world for millennia to come, just as the choices our ancestors made shaped the world we inherited. We have a responsibility to make those choices wisely, to learn from both the successes and the failures of the past. The fifth and final lesson is about the human spirit. What drove our ancestors to keep moving, to keep exploring, to push into territories where no human had ever been? We cannot know for certain, but we can guess. Curiosity, surely. The desire to see what lies over the next hill, around the next bend, across the next body of water. Necessity sometimes. The need to find new resources when old ones ran out, to escape conflict or competition, to seek better opportunities for oneself and one's children. But perhaps also something deeper, something in the human spirit that is never satisfied with what is, that always yearns for what might be, something that looks at the horizon and feels not fear but invitation, something that has driven us to explore not just the physical world, but the realms of thought and imagination, science and art, love and meaning. That spirit is still with us. It drove our ancestors out of Africa and around the world, and it drives us still. It sends us to the bottom of the ocean and the top of the mountains, to the frozen poles and the depths of space. It makes us restless, dissatisfied, always seeking, never quite content. It is both our glory and our burden, the source of our greatest achievements and our deepest unease. And now, as you drift towards sleep, let that spirit rest for a while. The journey is done, at least for tonight. You have walked with your ancestors from Africa to every corner of the earth, through forests and deserts, across mountains and oceans, into ice ages and tropical paradises. You have seen the world as they saw it, empty and waiting, full of danger and promise. You have felt, perhaps, something of what they felt, the fear of the unknown, the thrill of discovery, the satisfaction of survival. They did not know they were making history. They did not know their descendants would one day look back and wonder at their achievements. They were just living their lives, doing their best, putting one foot in front of the other in the hope that tomorrow would be better than today. And somehow, through all those countless footsteps, they created the world we live in now. The world where their descendants live in cities of millions, travel faster than any animal, communicate across distances that would have taken our ancestors months to walk. The world where we can look back through science and archaeology and genetics and see the path they walked, the choices they made, the legacy they left. That legacy is yours. You are the product of 100,000 years of walking, of surviving, of adapting and creating and dreaming. You carry in your genes the heritage of all those generations, all those individuals who lived and died so that their children could live and die in turn, down through the ages to you. You are the current endpoint of the longest journey ever made, and your children, if you have them, will carry that journey forward into a future we cannot imagine. Rest now, knowing where you came from. Rest now, knowing the strength and resilience of your ancestors. Rest now, knowing that the same spirit that carried them around the world is present in you, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow may bring. The fire burns low, the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere, the ocean washes against a shore where humans first landed thousands of years ago, still keeping the rhythm it kept before there were humans to hear it. The world goes on, as it always has, as it always will, indifferent to our presence but transformed by it nonetheless. Sleep now, dream of walking, dream of coastlines stretching to the horizon, of mountains rising in the distance, of strange lands waiting to be explored. Dream of your ancestors, those nameless thousands who made you possible, who walked so that you could be here tonight, listening to their story, preparing for your own journey through the coming day. The story is told, the journey is done, the world has been walked from end to end. Now rest, inheritor of all that walking, child of all those ancestors, dreamer of all those dreams. The morning will come soon enough, and with it new paths to walk, new territories to explore, new stories to tell. But for now, just rest, just sleep. Just let the rhythm of the ancient journey carry you gently into the darkness, where all journeys pause for a while, where all travellers rest, where all stories wait to be continued in the light of another day. Sleep well, walker. Sleep well, explorer. Sleep well, human. Your ancestors walked 100,000 years to bring you here. Honour them with your rest. Honour them with your dreams. Honour them by being alive, by being human, by carrying their legacy forward into whatever future awaits. The walk is not over. It will never be over, as long as humans dream of distant horizons. But for tonight, let your feet be still. Let your mind be quiet. Let your spirit rest. Tomorrow you will walk again, as your ancestors did, as your descendants will. Tonight, just sleep. The world will still be there when you wake, waiting for your footsteps, waiting for your story, waiting for you to add your chapter to the longest journey ever made. Good night, traveller, safe passage through the night, and when the morning comes, rise and walk again, as humans always have, as humans always will, until the last of us takes the last step on the long road that began in Africa so many thousands of years ago. The road goes ever on, and we go with it, walking, always walking, toward a destination we will never reach, but must forever seek. That is who we are. That is what it means to be human. And now, just for tonight, just for these few hours, let the walking stop. Let the journey pause. Let the traveller rest, sleep. The ancestors are watching over you. The path is safe. The fire still burns. Sleep and dream of the road and wake ready to walk again. Good night. Let me tell you more about what those early travellers experienced as they made their way across the world. Because the details matter. The textures of daily life matter. The small moments that added up to the greatest journey in history matter. Consider the morning routine of a family moving along the southern coast of Asia, perhaps 50,000 years ago, somewhere along what is now the coast of India. The sun rises over the ocean, painting the water in shades of gold and pink. The family stirs in their simple shelter, perhaps a lean-to of branches and leaves, perhaps nothing more than a depression in the sand behind a dune that blocked the wind during the night. They have slept in dozens of similar places, hundreds perhaps, and will sleep in hundreds more before their lives are done. The children wake first, as children always do, full of energy even before they have eaten. The adults rise more slowly, stiff from sleeping on the ground, joints aching from the endless walking. They are not young anymore, these parents, though they are probably not old by our standards, perhaps 30 or 35. Life is hard here, even in this relatively hospitable environment. People age faster when every calorie must be earned through labour, when there are no doctors or medicines, when injury or illness can mean death. But they get up. They always get up. There is no choice but to get up. Breakfast is whatever was left from yesterday, or whatever can be quickly gathered this morning. Perhaps some shellfish collected from the rocks at low tide. Perhaps some roots or tubers dug from the sand with a pointed stick. Perhaps nothing at all, if yesterday was lean, and this morning offers no easy pickings. Hunger is familiar. They have been hungry before and will be hungry again. It is simply part of life, a constant companion that sharpens the senses and motivates the search for food. After eating, or after deciding that there will be no eating, the family considers the day ahead. Which direction should they walk? The coast offers two choices: back the way they came, or forward into territory they have not seen before. Going back means familiar resources, known water sources, places where food has been found before. Going forward means uncertainty, risk, but also possibility. Perhaps the fishing is better ahead. Perhaps there are fruit trees or nut groves waiting to be discovered. Perhaps there is nothing but barren sand, and they will regret the choice. Today, as on most days, they choose to go forward. Why? We cannot know for certain. Perhaps the resources behind them are depleted. Perhaps simple curiosity drives them. Perhaps they have a vague sense that more people are coming behind them, that the coast is filling up, that the best opportunities lie ahead of the crowd. Or perhaps they simply like walking, like seeing new places, like the feeling of possibility that comes with territory not yet explored. They pack their few belongings, stone tools carefully made and precious, containers for water, perhaps gourds or animal bladders, cordage for binding and trapping, fire-making materials kept dry and ready. The total weight is not much, perhaps 10 or 15 pounds per adult, but it represents everything they own, everything they need to survive. A modern backpacker would recognise the principle, if not the specifics. And then they walk, one foot in front of the other, along the edge of the sea, following the line where water meets land. The children run ahead, chasing birds, splashing in the shallows, finding treasures in the rackline. The adults walk more steadily, conserving energy, scanning the environment for opportunities and threats. They talk, perhaps, or walk in companionable silence. They have been walking together for years. They know each other's rhythms, each other's moods, each other's needs. The conversation, if any, can be sparse without being cold. Midday brings rest. The sun is too hot for comfortable walking, and the family finds shade under a rocky overhang or a stand of coastal trees. They eat again if food is available, drink water if water can be found, nap if sleep comes. The children grow restless, kept still by parental admonishment but yearning to explore. This is how children have always been, how they still are, how they always will be. Endless energy confined by adult caution. In the afternoon they walk again. The sun sinks toward the horizon behind them as they face east, casting long shadows ahead. They watch for a good place to camp, somewhere with water and shelter and a minimum of danger. Finding such a place is not guaranteed. Some nights they sleep in less than ideal spots, making do with what is available, accepting discomfort as the price of the journey. As darkness approaches, they stop. Fire is kindled, perhaps from embers carried from the previous night's fire, perhaps made fresh with drill and tinder. The flames push back the darkness, create a circle of safety, cook whatever food has been gathered during the day. The family draws close, sharing warmth and company, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky above the sea. And then sleep. Another day completed, another few miles covered, another step in a journey that has been going on for generations and will continue for generations more. No one thinks of it as historic. No one imagines that their distant descendants will wonder at their achievements. It is simply life, the only life they know, the endless rhythm of walking and eating and sleeping and walking again. Multiply this day by thousands. Multiply this family by hundreds of similar families, all moving in the same direction, all seeking the same things, all adding their steps to the great journey. Over centuries and millennia, they cover the coastline of Asia. Over generations, they reach the shores of Australia. Over time spans we can barely comprehend, they populate a new continent and develop cultures that will persist for 60,000 years or more. But each day was just a day. Each step was just a step. The extraordinary emerged from the accumulation of the ordinary, as it always does. Now let me tell you about a different kind of journey, in a different environment, faced with different challenges. Consider a family group moving through the interior of Central Asia, perhaps 40,000 years ago, on the vast grasslands that stretch from the Black Sea to the mountains of China. This is not the easy coastal walk we imagined before. This is harsh country with brutal winters and scorching summers, with water scarce and predators plentiful. The people who live here have adapted to conditions that would kill a coastal dweller within weeks. Winter on the Central Asian steppe is a test of survival. Temperatures drop far below freezing. Snow covers the ground for months. The wind blows constantly, stealing heat from any exposed skin. Without sophisticated clothing and shelter, humans cannot survive here. But our ancestors figured out how to survive, and not just survive, but thrive. The clothing is made from animal skins, carefully prepared through a process of scraping and tanning and sewing that transforms raw hide into soft, supple leather. Multiple layers trap air for insulation. Fur-lined hoods protect the head and face. Mittens cover the hands, boots cover the feet. A person dressed in this clothing can function at temperatures that would be lethal without it. Technology conquering environment, as it has done throughout human history. The shelters are more substantial than the coastal lean-tos. Some are portable, frameworks of poles covered with skins that can be erected and dismantled as the group moves. Others are semi-permanent, dug into the ground for insulation, roofed with sod or skins, heated by fires that burn through the long winter nights. A family might spend the entire winter in such a shelter, venturing out only to hunt or gather fuel, waiting for spring to release them from the cold's grip. Food in winter comes primarily from hunting. The herds of horses and bison and mammoths that roam the steppe are the foundation of human life here. When a hunt succeeds, there is abundance, meat and fat and organs, hides for clothing and shelter, bones for tools and fuel. When hunts fail, there is hunger, sometimes starvation. Life on the steppe is feast or famine, with little in between. The people who succeeded here were the ones who could find game reliably, who could store food against lean times, who could cooperate effectively in hunts that required multiple hunters working together. They developed technologies for hunting that were sophisticated by any standard. Spears and atlatls and eventually bows, driving techniques that channeled herds toward kill zones, strategies for approaching wary animals without being detected. This knowledge, accumulated over generations, was the difference between survival and extinction. Summer brought a different set of challenges. The temperatures soared, the grasses dried, the waterholes shrank. The herds moved, following the grazing, and the humans moved with them. Summer was a time of travel, of covering large distances across the open steppe, of seeking out the scattered resources of a harsh but not impossible land. The people who lived here were not inferior to those who took the easier coastal route. They were differently adapted, solving different problems with different solutions. Their descendants would include the great horse peoples of history, the nomads who would one day sweep out of the steppes to conquer empires. The skills developed by those first settlers, 40,000 years ago, would echo through millennia of human history. Now let me take you north, into the most extreme environment that humans have ever settled permanently, the Arctic. This is the land of the midnight sun and the noonday darkness, of permafrost and polar bears, of temperatures so cold that breath freezes in the air and exposed skin can suffer frostbite within minutes. The humans who settled here were pushing the very limits of what is biologically possible for our species. The first humans to reach the Arctic came from Siberia, itself already a challenging environment. They came following the animal herds, the mammoths and reindeer and musk oxen that somehow thrived in this frozen land. They came with technologies developed over thousands of years of living in cold climates, technologies that had already proven their worth on the steppes and in the subarctic forests. But the high Arctic demanded even more. The clothing had to be even better. The shelters had to be more effective. The hunting techniques had to be refined for prey adapted to Arctic conditions. The margin for error, already thin in Siberia, became almost non-existent here. One mistake, one failed hunt, one torn garment, and death was waiting. The people who succeeded developed clothing systems that remain impressive even by modern standards. Inner layers of soft fur worn with the fur side in, providing loft and insulation. Outer layers of fur worn with the fur side out, shedding snow and resisting wind. Boots with multiple layers and sophisticated sole designs. Mittens that could be quickly removed for fine work and quickly replaced to prevent frostbite. Every piece was designed, refined, improved over generations until it approached the optimal solution for keeping a human body warm in the coldest place on Earth. The shelters ranged from temporary snow houses, built fresh each night from the only building material available, to substantial semi-permanent structures of sod and stone and bone and skin. A well-built winter house could maintain interior temperatures far above the outside air, warm enough for comfort even when the exterior temperature dropped to 50 or 60 degrees below zero. Fire was precious here, because fuel was scarce. The Arctic has few trees, and those that exist are small and twisted, poor sources of firewood. The people burned animal fat instead, using stone lamps that provided light and a modest amount of heat. They burned animal bones, which contain enough fat to sustain combustion. They burned dried dung when nothing else was available. They made do with what the land provided, as humans always have, as humans always will. Food came almost entirely from hunting and fishing. The land offered almost nothing to gather. No fruits or nuts, no tubers or grains, just occasional edible lissins and the contents of animal stomachs. Meat was everything. Meat and fat, protein and energy, the raw material of survival. The people ate it fresh when possible, frozen when necessary, raw or cooked depending on circumstances and preference. And yet, despite the harshness of this land, or perhaps because of it, the Arctic peoples developed cultures of remarkable richness. Their art, their music, their stories, their spiritual beliefs all reflected a deep engagement with their environment, a relationship with the animals they hunted that went beyond simple predation into something like reverence. They did not just survive in the Arctic. They found meaning and beauty there, as humans find meaning and beauty wherever they go. The Arctic settlers were among the last to reach their ultimate destination, the first humans to walk from Asia into the Americas across the Bering Land Bridge that connected the continents during the Ice Ages. We do not know exactly when this happened, but it was at least 15,000 years ago, possibly much earlier. The people who made the crossing did not know they were entering a new world. They were simply following the game, doing what their ancestors had always done, trusting that the same skills that had sustained them in Siberia would sustain them in whatever land lay ahead. And they were right. The Americas, though new to humans, offered familiar challenges and familiar solutions. The same basic technologies that worked in Asia worked in America, because the environments were similar enough that little adaptation was needed. What was needed was simply the willingness to keep going, to keep exploring, to keep pushing into unknown territory. That willingness had brought humans all the way from Africa to Alaska. It would carry them all the way to Tierra del Fuego, to the furthest point south that humans could reach before running out of land. Now let me slow down even more and consider what it actually felt like to be one of those first Americans, one of the people who crossed from Asia and found themselves in a land of unimaginable abundance. Because the Americas 15,000 years ago were abundant in a way that is hard to comprehend today. The megafauna had not yet been hunted to extinction. Mammoths roamed the grasslands, their shaggy forms silhouetted against the sky. Giant ground sloths browsed in the forests, creatures the size of elephants with claws as long as a human forearm. Saber-toothed cats stalked the game trails, their enormous fangs gleaming in the sun. Horses and camels grazed in herds that darkened the plains. The world was full of giants, and those giants were not afraid of humans because they had never seen humans before. Imagine being one of the first hunters to encounter these animals. Imagine approaching a mammoth that does not run away because it has never learned to fear your kind. Imagine the abundance of meat, the ease of hunting, the sense of unlimited possibility. This was the world your ancestors entered when they walked into the Americas, a world that must have seemed like paradise after the harsh conditions of Siberia. But paradise does not last forever. Within a few thousand years of human arrival, most of the megafauna were gone. The mammoths disappeared, the giant sloths vanished, the saber-toothed cats died out. Whether humans hunted them to extinction or climate change killed them, or some combination of both is still debated, but the result is clear. The Age of Giants ended shortly after humans arrived. The early Americans had to adapt, as humans always adapt. They learned to hunt the smaller animals that remained, bison and deer and elk and caribou. They learned to gather the plants that grew in different regions, developing intimate knowledge of local environments that varied enormously from place to place. They spread out across 2 vast continents, filling every niche, adapting to every environment, becoming the diverse peoples who would one day be called Native Americans. The diversity of environments in the Americas is staggering. Consider just North America, the Arctic tundra of Alaska and northern Canada, the dense boreal forests of the subarctic, the temperate rainforests of the Pacific Northwest, where rainfall can exceed 200 inches per year, the dry deserts of the Southwest, where water is scarce and survival requires completely different strategies, the Great Plains, where vast herds of bison supported cultures built entirely around the hunt, the deciduous forests of the East, rich in nuts and game and wild plants, the swamps and bayous of the Southeast, the tropical environments of Florida. Each of these regions required different approaches to survival, and the people who settled them developed different cultures to meet different challenges. The result was hundreds of distinct societies, each adapted to its particular corner of the Americas, each with its own language and traditions and way of life. A similar diversity developed in South America. The Andes Mountains, one of the longest and highest mountain ranges on Earth, created environments ranging from tropical lowlands to frozen peaks within just a few miles of each other. The Amazon Basin, the largest rainforest on the planet, offered challenges and opportunities found nowhere else. The deserts of coastal Peru, the grasslands of Argentina, the fjords of Chile, each region shaped the people who settled there in different ways. By the time European explorers arrived in 1492, the Americas had been thoroughly colonized for over 10,000 years. Every habitable region had been settled. Every usable resource was being exploited. The population was in the tens of millions, possibly much higher. Civilizations had risen and fallen, empires had expanded and contracted, cultures had flourished and developed to extraordinary levels of sophistication. The Maya had created one of the most advanced mathematical and astronomical systems in the ancient world. The Aztecs had built a capital city larger than any in Europe at the time. The Incas had created an empire that stretched along the Andes for thousands of miles, connected by a road system that still impresses engineers today. The people of the Americas were not primitive. They were not waiting to be discovered. They were the inheritors of 15,000 years of continuous cultural development, the descendants of those first brave souls who had walked across from Siberia into an unknown land. When Europeans arrived, they did not find an empty wilderness. They found a world as fully human as their own, just differently developed, just shaped by different historical circumstances. The tragedy of what happened next, the diseases and conquests and displacements that reduced those populations by 90% or more, is a story for another night. Tonight we are focused on the journey, on the incredible fact that humans walked from Africa to Tierra del Fuego, from a single origin point to every corner of 2 vast continents, in the space of perhaps 100,000 years. Let me return now to the Old World, because there is more to tell about how humans spread and adapted there. We have talked about the coastal route to Australia, and the inland route through Central Asia, and the Arctic route to America. But there are other stories, other journeys, other adaptations that deserve attention. Consider the settlement of Europe, which happened in waves over tens of thousands of years. The first modern humans to reach Europe, perhaps 45,000 years ago, found a land already inhabited by Neanderthals, who had lived there for hundreds of thousands of years. We have talked about the Neanderthals already, about the competition and interbreeding that occurred, about their eventual disappearance. But the human settlement of Europe continued long after the Neanderthals were gone. During the Ice Ages, glaciers advanced and retreated, making Europe alternately habitable and uninhabitable. When the ice advanced, humans retreated south, to refugia in Iberia and Italy and the Balkans, where the climate remained tolerable. When the ice retreated, humans followed, recolonizing lands that had been abandoned for thousands of years. This pulse of advance and retreat happened many times over the course of the Ice Ages, each cycle leaving its mark on the genetic and cultural heritage of European peoples. The Europe that emerged from the last Ice Age, around 12,000 years ago, was a different place than the Europe that had entered it. The megafauna were mostly gone, hunted to extinction, or killed by climate change. The forests had spread north as the glaciers retreated, creating new environments that required new adaptations. The human population had grown and diversified, developing regional cultures and languages that would eventually become the ethnic diversity of historic Europe. Then came another wave of change, perhaps the most significant since humans first arrived. Agriculture was invented, probably independently in several places around the world, but spreading to Europe from the Middle East starting around 9,000 years ago. The farmers brought new technologies, new ways of life, new genes that would eventually come to dominate European populations. The hunter-gatherers who had lived in Europe for tens of thousands of years were largely replaced, though some of their genes survive in modern Europeans, a testament to complex interactions between farmers and foragers that played out over millennia. The spread of agriculture into Europe was itself a kind of migration, a wave of people moving from the Middle East into new territories, bringing their seeds and their animals and their ways of life with them. It was not as dramatic as the original human colonization of the continent, but it was profound in its effects, transforming Europe from a land of hunters and gatherers to a land of farmers and herders, setting the stage for the civilizations that would eventually emerge. Similar stories played out across the Old World. In Africa, the spread of Bantu-speaking peoples from West Africa across the southern half of the continent was a migration comparable in scale to the original human expansion. In Asia, the domestication of rice and millet led to population expansions that shaped the genetic and cultural landscape of the continent. In the Pacific, the Polynesian expansion we discussed earlier represented a final wave of human colonization that completed the settlement of the habitable world. Each of these later migrations built on the earlier ones. Each took advantage of territories that had been opened up by previous waves of human expansion. Each added new layers of complexity to the human story, new chapters in the ongoing saga of our species spreading across the earth. Let me return now to a question I raised earlier but did not fully answer. Why did humans keep moving? What drove our ancestors to leave familiar territories and venture into unknown lands? We have talked about necessity, about the push of scarce resources and the pull of new opportunities. We have talked about curiosity, about the human desire to see what lies beyond the horizon. But there is more to say, because the human migration was not just about survival or curiosity. It was also about conflict, about the social dynamics that push some individuals and groups to seek new homes. In any human society, there are winners and losers. Some individuals are more successful than others, more powerful, more respected. Some have better access to resources, to mates, to status. The winners tend to stay put, enjoying the benefits of their position. The losers, or those who simply want to escape the constraints of established hierarchies, have an incentive to move, to find new places where they can start fresh, where established pecking orders do not yet exist. This dynamic may have been crucial to human expansion. The pioneers who walked into new territories were not necessarily the strongest or most successful members of their original communities. They may have been the misfits, the rebels, the unlucky, the ambitious. They may have been fleeing conflict or punishment, seeking escape from situations that had become intolerable. They may have been the young without established positions in their home communities, willing to take risks that their elders would not. We cannot know the personal stories of those ancient pioneers. Their motivations are lost to time, unrecoverable by any archaeological technique. But we can recognize that the same human dynamics that drive emigration today probably drove emigration then. People leave home for many reasons, but one of the most common is the hope of a better life, the belief that the future lies somewhere other than where you are now. Another factor in human expansion was population pressure. When a territory fills up with people, when resources become scarce, some people will leave. They have no choice, really, if staying means starvation or conflict. The ones who leave become the pioneers, the colonizers of new lands, whether they intended to play that role or not. Population pressure creates a constant outward push, a demographic expansion that drives the settlement of new territories. This expansion is not conscious or planned. No one sits in a council meeting and decides that it is time to colonize a new continent. But the cumulative effect of individual decisions, each person seeking a better situation, each family moving to where resources are more available, is exactly as if there were such a plan. The human species expands because that is what species do when they are successful, when their populations grow faster than their resources, when some individuals can improve their situations by moving. Technology also played a role, though the relationship is complex. Better technology can support larger populations in a given area, reducing the need for expansion. But better technology can also enable expansion into territories that were previously uninhabitable, opening up new lands for settlement. The history of human expansion is partly a history of technological innovation, of new tools and techniques that allowed our ancestors to survive in places that would have killed their predecessors. We have talked about clothing and shelter, about fire and hunting weapons. But there were many other innovations, most of them invisible in the archaeological record because they were made of perishable materials. Better ways of processing food, better ways of storing food for lean times, better ways of carrying water, better ways of constructing shelters, better ways of treating injuries and illnesses. Each improvement, however small, increased the chances of survival in marginal environments, pushed the boundaries of the habitable world a little further, enabled another step in the great journey. The boats that carried humans to Australia represent one of the most significant technological innovations in all of human history. Before boats, humans were limited to land they could walk to, or at most to islands they could reach by swimming or wading. After boats, the entire coastline of the world became accessible, and ultimately the remotest islands of the Pacific. The boat was the technology that completed human expansion, that allowed our species to reach every habitable place on Earth. We do not know when boats were invented, or where, or by whom. The evidence does not survive. Wooden reeds and animal skins, the materials of ancient boats, decay quickly in most environments. We know boats existed by 65,000 years ago at the latest, because humans reached Australia then and could not have done so without watercraft. But boats may be much older, perhaps 100,000 years or more. Early humans living along coastlines and rivers would have had every incentive to develop floating vessels, and the technology is not inherently difficult. A log floats, a bundle of reeds floats. The step from observing natural flotation to deliberately creating a floating platform is not a large one. Whatever their origin, boats changed everything. They allowed faster travel along coastlines than walking did. They allowed access to marine resources that were out of reach from shore. They allowed the colonization of islands that would otherwise have remained empty of humans forever. The Great Pacific Expansion would have been impossible without sophisticated sailing technology. But even the simplest rafts and canoes opened up new possibilities that changed the course of human history. Let me tell you now about one more environment, one more adaptation, one more chapter in the story of human expansion, the settlement of the high mountains. Most of the world's highest mountains were not settled until relatively recently in human history, because altitude presents unique challenges that require unique solutions. At high altitude, the air contains less oxygen. Physical exertion becomes difficult. The body struggles to function normally. People who are not adapted to high altitude suffer from altitude sickness, which can be debilitating or even fatal. They cannot think clearly, cannot work effectively, cannot survive for long without descending to lower elevations. Yet humans did settle the high mountains, eventually. The Tibetan Plateau, the roof of the world, has been continuously inhabited for at least 30,000 years, and possibly much longer. The Andes of South America have supported human populations for at least 11,000 years. The Ethiopian highlands have been home to humans for even longer. In each case, the settlers developed biological adaptations to high altitude over many generations. Their bodies became more efficient at extracting oxygen from thin air. Their blood carried more hemoglobin. Their lungs worked harder. Their hearts pumped more efficiently. These adaptations are written in their genes, visible to modern scientists who study the genetics of altitude adaptation. The Tibetan Plateau is particularly remarkable because it is so high and so harsh. Much of the plateau lies above 14,000 feet, higher than any mountain in the contiguous United States. Winter temperatures drop far below zero. The air holds less than 60% of the oxygen found at sea level. Yet humans have lived there for thousands of years, herding yaks and growing barley and building monasteries that cling to mountainsides in defiance of every physical hardship. The Andean highlands are similarly challenging, though in different ways. The terrain is steeper, the valleys deeper, the climatic zones more compressed. Within a day's walk, you can descend from frozen peaks to tropical lowlands, passing through every climate zone along the way. The people who settled the Andes learned to exploit this vertical diversity, growing different crops at different altitudes, trading between ecological zones, creating economic systems that integrated coast and highland and jungle into a single network. The high-altitude settlers remind us that human expansion was not just horizontal, but vertical, not just across the surface of the earth, but up and down the mountains that wrinkle that surface. Our ancestors climbed as well as walked, ascending to heights that would leave most modern humans gasping and dizzy, making homes in places that seem barely habitable, even with all our modern technology. We have covered a lot of ground tonight, in every sense of the phrase. We have walked from Africa to Australia, from Siberia to Tierra del Fuego, from sea level to the highest plateaus. We have watched humans adapt to every environment, develop every technology, create every culture necessary to survive in conditions ranging from tropical abundance to Arctic scarcity. We have seen the incredible plasticity of the human species, our ability to live anywhere, eat anything, solve any problem that the environment throws at us. But there is one more thing to say before you drift off to sleep, one more reflection on what this great journey means for you, lying there in the darkness, listening to this story. You are here because they walked. Every one of those steps, every one of those journeys, every one of those adaptations was necessary for you to exist. If any link in the chain had been broken, if any of your ancestors had failed to survive and reproduce, you would not be here tonight. The odds against your existence are astronomical, almost inconceivable, and yet here you are, the improbable product of 100,000 years of walking, the inheritor of every adaptation and innovation that your ancestors developed along the way. Their strength is in your muscles, their cleverness is in your brain, their resilience is in your spirit. You come from a long line of survivors, of problem solvers, of people who kept going when every rational calculation said they should give up. Whatever challenges you face in your life, whatever obstacles seem insurmountable, remember where you come from. Remember the people who walked from Africa to everywhere, who crossed deserts and mountains and oceans, who survived ice ages and droughts and everything else nature threw at them. Their blood runs in your veins. Their heritage is your heritage. If they could do what they did, with nothing but stone tools and animal skins and their own determination, surely you can handle whatever tomorrow brings. The night's quiet now. The ancient journey has been told, from its beginning in Africa to its end at every corner of the earth. Somewhere, as you lie here, a ship is crossing the Pacific that the Polynesians sailed thousands of years ago. Somewhere, a plane is flying over the Bering Strait where your ancestors walked during the ice ages. Somewhere, someone is standing on a mountaintop in Tibet or Peru, breathing the thin air that their ancestors learned to breathe, looking out over a world that humanity has claimed as its own. The journey is not over. It will never be over. The same spirit that drove your ancestors to walk out of Africa is alive in you, driving humanity still, pushing us toward new frontiers, new discoveries, new chapters in the story that began when the first human wondered what lay over the next hill. We have walked to every corner of the earth, and still we are not satisfied. We have reached the top of every mountain and the bottom of every sea, and still we seek new horizons. We have left footprints on the moon, and sent our machines to the edges of the solar system, and still we dream of distant stars. That is who we are. That is what it means to be human. We are the walking species, the exploring species, the species that cannot rest until it has seen everything, done everything, understood everything. It is both our glory and our burden, the gift and the curse of our restless ancestors who could not stay put, who could not accept the world as they found it, who always believed that something better lay just ahead. For tonight, let that restlessness sleep. Let the walking stop just for a few hours. Let the explorer rest, dreaming of journeys taken and journeys yet to come. Tomorrow you will walk again, as your ancestors did, as your descendants will. Tonight, just be still, just be quiet, just be present in this moment, in this place, in this body that is itself the product of 100,000 years of journey. The fire burns low, the stars wheel overhead, the ancient road stretches behind you and before you, infinite in both directions, the path that has no beginning and no end because the walking is the destination, the journey is the goal. Rest now, traveller, rest, explorer, rest, inheritor of the longest walk in history. Your ancestors are watching over you. Your descendants are waiting for you to wake. The road goes ever on, but for tonight, for these few precious hours, let the walking pause. Sleep. Dream of distant horizons. Dream of coastlines stretching to infinity. Dream of mountains rising from the plain. Dream of the endless, eternal, glorious human urge to see what lies beyond. And when the morning comes, rise and walk again, as humans always have, as humans always will. Good night, walker. Safe travels through the night, and when you wake, know that you carry within you the strength of every ancestor who ever walked this road before you, the hope of every descendant who will walk it after you are gone. You are the journey made flesh. You are the destination in motion. You are human, and the road is yours. Sleep well. The morning will find you ready. The road will be waiting, and the great journey will continue one step at a time until the last human takes the last step on the last road to the last horizon. Sleep, dream, rest. Tomorrow we walk. Let me tell you more stories from the journey, because every mile has its story. Every generation has its struggles and triumphs. Every step forward was taken by someone whose life mattered, whose choices shaped the future, whose courage or desperation or simple stubbornness added one more link to the chain that connects you to Africa. Consider the first humans to enter the rainforests of Southeast Asia. Perhaps 60,000 years ago, they came from the drier lands to the west, from savannas and coastal environments where the sky was visible overhead and the ground was firm beneath their feet. The rainforest was something different entirely. Dark, wet, tangled, confusing. The canopy blocked the sun. The undergrowth blocked the paths. The humidity made everything damp and uncomfortable. The sounds were strange, the animals were unfamiliar, the food sources were hidden and unknown. Yet humans adapted, as they always do. They learned which trees produced edible fruit and when those fruits would ripen. They learned which plants were poisonous and which were medicinal. They learned to hunt the animals of the forest, monkeys and deer and wild pigs, birds and lizards and insects. They learned to make shelters from the abundant plant materials, to navigate by the patterns of vegetation and the sounds of water, to find their way through an environment that would have been utterly disorienting to their grandparents. The rainforest dwellers developed cultures perfectly suited to their environment. They became some of the most skilled botanists in the world, with knowledge of plant properties that modern science is still cataloguing. They became expert hunters of forest game, with tracking abilities that seem almost supernatural to outsiders. They became forest people, as adapted to their environment as any species that evolved there, though their adaptation was cultural rather than biological. Their descendants still live in the rainforest today, the indigenous peoples of Malaysia and Indonesia, and the Philippines and New Guinea, carriers of knowledge accumulated over thousands of generations, guardians of traditions that stretch back to the first humans who ventured into the green darkness and figured out how to survive there. Consider also the first humans to enter the deserts, the great sand seas of the Sahara and Arabia and Australia. Desert environments seem impossibly harsh, with temperatures that soar during the day and plummet at night, with water so scarce that finding a drink can be the difference between life and death. Yet humans live in deserts too, have lived in deserts for thousands of years, have developed ways of life that extract sustenance from what seems like utter barrenness. The secret is knowledge. Desert peoples know where water can be found, in underground aquifers that can be accessed by digging, in plants that store water in their tissues, in the bodies of animals that have themselves found water somewhere. They know when water will be available, after the rare rains that bring temporary abundance, at certain seasons when particular water sources are reliable. They know how to survive the periods between water, how to minimize exertion during the heat of the day, how to travel during the cooler hours, how to conserve every drop of moisture their bodies contain. Desert peoples also know where food can be found, knowledge that seems impossible given the apparent emptiness of the landscape. Seeds and roots and fruits are there if you know where to look, if you know when to harvest, if you know how to process them for eating. Animals are there too, adapted to the desert as the humans are adapted, edible if you can catch them, sources of water as well as food for those who know how to use them. The Aboriginal Australians who lived in the Western Desert survived in conditions that would kill most modern humans within days. They did it through knowledge accumulated over hundreds of generations, knowledge of water and food and roots and seasons, knowledge encoded in songs and stories and ceremonies that mapped their entire world. Their songlines traced paths across the landscape that connected water source to water source, food supply to food supply, safety to safety. To walk a songline was to access all the knowledge necessary to survive a journey across apparently trackless waste. The desert settlers remind us that human expansion was not just about walking to new places. It was about learning new places, understanding them, developing the knowledge necessary to survive in them. Each new environment required a new education, a new accumulation of lore about resources and dangers and possibilities. Each expansion was an intellectual achievement as much as a physical one, a triumph of human curiosity and observation, and memory over the challenges of unfamiliar terrain. Now let me tell you about the edges, the boundaries, the places where human expansion finally stopped, because it could go no further. Not every place on Earth can support human life. Antarctica, for example, remains uninhabited except for scientists in their research stations. The interior of the largest desert supports no permanent population. The tops of the highest mountains are visited briefly but never settled. These are the places where human adaptability finally meets its match, where no amount of technology or knowledge can sustain human life indefinitely. But our ancestors pushed right up to these boundaries, settled as close to the uninhabitable as they could get, extracted a living from landscapes that seemed barely capable of supporting life at all. The Inuit of the high Arctic lived at the edge of possibility, surviving on marine mammals and fish, in an environment where nothing grows and the winter darkness lasts for months. The nomads of the deep Sahara survived at another edge, moving constantly to stay ahead of the drought, finding water where no water seemed to exist. The peoples of the Tibetan Plateau survived at yet another edge, living at altitudes where lowlanders cannot even think clearly, where every breath requires effort, where the human body operates at the very margin of what is physiologically possible. These edge dwellers represent the furthest extension of human expansion, the final frontiers of a species that had already conquered almost everything. They lived where they did not because it was easy, but because everywhere else was already taken, because they had been pushed to the margins by other populations, because they had no choice but to make a life in places that no one else wanted. Their survival testifies to human resilience, to the refusal to give up even when circumstances seem impossible. If humans could live in the high Arctic, in the deep Sahara, on the Tibetan Plateau, then surely we can survive anything. Surely there is no challenge we cannot meet, no obstacle we cannot overcome, no environment we cannot eventually master. The edge dwellers are proof of concept for human indomitability, evidence that we will not be stopped by anything short of absolute impossibility. And even then, we keep trying. Even today, humans live in Antarctica, scientists who rotate through research stations in shifts, never staying permanently but never quite leaving either. Even today, humans venture into space, living for months at a time on the International Space Station, preparing for the day when we'll leave Earth permanently and expand into the cosmos. The same impulse that drove our ancestors out of Africa is driving us toward Mars and beyond. The same restlessness, the same curiosity, the same refusal to accept any boundary as final. Let me take you back in time once more, to a moment that might have happened somewhere along the route of human expansion, a moment that captures something essential about what this journey meant to those who lived it. Imagine a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, standing at the edge of unknown territory. Behind her is everything she has ever known, her family, her band, the landscapes of her childhood. Before her is something new, a valley she's never seen, a river she has never crossed, a future she cannot imagine. She is afraid. She would be foolish not to be afraid. The unknown is dangerous. The familiar is safe. Every instinct tells her to stay where she is, to remain with her people, to live out her life in the same territory where her mother lived, and her grandmother lived, and all her ancestors back to the beginning of memory. But something else tells her to go. Maybe resources are scarce where she is and rumoured to be abundant where she is not. Maybe she has quarrelled with her family, or fallen in love with someone forbidden, or simply grown tired of the same faces and the same places and the same days repeating endlessly. Maybe she is young and bold and cannot resist the call of the horizon, the whispered promise that something wonderful might be waiting just over the next ridge. She takes a step, then another. The ground is the same under her feet. There is no magic threshold that separates the known from the unknown. Just more ground, more plants, more sky, more of the same world she has always inhabited, but also different, subtly different. The plants are not quite the same species. The birds sing in slightly different songs. The river runs in a direction she does not expect. She is in new territory now, territory no human has ever walked before, though she does not know this and would not care if she did. She's just looking for a place to live. She walks for days, maybe weeks. She learns the new landscape as she goes, noting water sources and food plants and good campsites. She makes mistakes and learns from them. She gets hungry and finds food. She gets scared and finds courage. She's alone, more alone than she has ever been, but also more free, more fully herself, more alive than she has ever felt. Eventually she finds what she's looking for. A valley with a river, a good place to settle, a land that will support her if she treats it right. She builds a shelter. She makes tools from local materials. She begins the long process of turning unknown territory into home, of transforming a strange land into a familiar one. She will live out her life here. She will have children here, perhaps, children who will know this valley as intimately as she knew her original homeland. They will have no memory of where she came from, no knowledge of the journey she made. They will simply live here, in this place that their mother discovered, in this home that exists only because one young woman was brave enough or desperate enough to walk into the unknown. Her children will have children, and those children will have children, and so on across thousands of years and hundreds of generations. Her descendants will spread out from the valley she discovered, filling the surrounding region, eventually encountering other groups and merging or competing with them. The genetic contribution she made, the cultural tradition she started will blend with countless others, becoming part of the great river of human history that flows from the past to the future. She has no way to know any of this. She knows only that she is alive, that she has found a home, that tomorrow will bring its own challenges and she will meet them as she has met all the others. She sleeps that night beside a fire she built herself, in a shelter she constructed herself, in a land that is slowly becoming hers. She has done what humans have always done. She has walked into the unknown and made it known. She has taken territory from the wilderness and added it to the human world. She has extended the reach of her species by one more valley, one more river, one more fraction of the Earth's surface. There were countless such moments across the 100,000 years of human expansion. Countless young women and young men standing at boundaries and choosing to cross them. Countless decisions made in the moment, for reasons practical or emotional or spiritual, that cumulatively added up to the colonization of the entire planet. Countless acts of individual courage and desperation that, taken together, produced the most successful migration in the history of life on Earth. Those individuals did not know they were making history. They were just living their lives, trying to survive, seeking better circumstances for themselves and their children. But history is made of such small decisions, accumulated over time, compounding like interest until the results are beyond anything the original actors could have imagined. The individual steps were small. The cumulative journey was immense. This is the human pattern, the human way. Small steps, long time, great distances. It is how we spread across the earth. It is how we built civilizations. It is how we are still expanding, still exploring, still pushing into new frontiers that our ancestors could not have imagined. The journey continues. It will continue as long as humans exist, as long as there are boundaries left to cross and unknowns left to explore. The final frontier is not space. There is no final frontier. There is only the next step and the next and the next after that, until the walking itself becomes the destination, until the journey becomes the meaning, until we understand that the human story is not about arriving somewhere, but about the endless, eternal act of going. Let me bring you back now to the present moment, to your own place in this story, to the connection that binds you to every ancestor who ever walked the road before you. You exist at a unique point in the human journey. You are the first generation to know the whole story, to understand where we came from and how we got here, to see the entire arc of human migration laid out in genetic evidence and archaeological finds and historical records. Your ancestors walked the road without maps. You can see the map at last. You're also the generation that may extend the journey beyond Earth itself. Within your lifetime, or your children's lifetimes, humans may establish permanent settlements on Mars. The migration that began in Africa 100,000 years ago may leap to another planet, beginning a new chapter in the story of expansion that dwarfs everything that came before. If and when that happens, it will not be because of some sudden change in human nature. It will be because the same impulse that drove your ancestors out of Africa, across Asia, over the oceans, to the top of the highest mountains and the ends of the earth, has finally found a new outlet. The walking will continue, just with new technologies and across new kinds of distance. The first humans to live permanently on Mars will be your descendants, part of the same chain that connects you to Africa, to the first chopper struck from stone, to the first ape who stood upright and wondered what lay over the horizon. The chain is unbroken. The journey continues. You are a link in that chain. You carry the cumulative heritage of 100,000 years of walking, of adapting, of surviving, of refusing to quit. Whatever comes next, you will face it with all that heritage behind you, with all those ancestors watching over you, with all that strength and resilience and stubborn determination that got humanity from Africa to everywhere, and will carry us from everywhere to wherever we go next. Sleep now, knowing who you are. Sleep now, knowing where you came from. Sleep now, knowing that the same spirit that carried your ancestors around the world is alive in you, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow brings. The fire burns low, the stars wheel overhead, the same stars that guided the first sailors across the Pacific, the same stars that the first Americans saw when they walked into their new world, the same stars that have watched over every human journey since the beginning. The world goes on, the walking goes on, the story goes on. But for now, for these few precious hours, you can rest, you can sleep, you can let the journey pause while you recover your strength for the walking that lies ahead. Good night, traveller. Good night, inheritor of the longest walk. Good night, descendant of those who walked from Africa to everywhere, ancestor of those who will walk from Earth to the stars. Your people are watching over you. Your road is waiting for you. Your journey will continue when the morning comes. Until then, rest. Until then, dream. Until then, let the ancient rhythm of the human migration carry you gently into sleep, as it has carried our species gently across the world, as it will carry our descendants gently across the universe, one step at a time, one night at a time, one dream at a time, forever. Sleep well. The morning will find you ready, the road will be waiting, and the great human journey will continue, as it always has, as it always will, until the last human takes the last step on the last road to the last frontier, wherever and whenever that might be. Pleasant dreams, walker, safe travels through the night, and when you wake, remember, you come from a line of travellers, of explorers, of those who would not be stopped by any obstacle. Whatever the day brings, you are equipped to handle it. Whatever challenges arise, you have the heritage to overcome them. Whatever frontiers appear, you have the spirit to cross them. You are human. The road is yours. Now sleep. Around this time, the population bottleneck left its mark on our genes, visible to modern scientists who study human genetic diversity. We are all descended from that tiny surviving population, all cousins many times removed, all inheritors of whatever luck or skill or circumstance allowed our ancestors to survive when so many others did not. Think about what that means. At some point in the deep past, your direct ancestors were among the few thousand humans left alive on Earth. They survived whatever catastrophe struck, whether volcanic winter or drought or disease or something else entirely. They found food when food was scarce. They found shelter when the climate turned hostile. They kept their children alive when death was everywhere. And because they survived, you exist. If they had failed, if they had been among the majority who died, your entire lineage would have ended right there, 70,000 years ago, and you would never have been born. The bottleneck was not the only crisis. There were others, smaller perhaps, but still significant. Local populations went extinct regularly throughout human prehistory, their particular variations and innovations lost forever. Climate shifts made previously habitable regions uninhabitable, forcing migrations and die-offs. Diseases swept through populations without immunity. Conflicts with other human species like the Neanderthals may have eliminated some groups entirely. The journey was not guaranteed to succeed. At every step, failure was possible. The fact that we are here, that humans occupy every continent and number in the billions, is not the inevitable outcome of some predetermined plan. It is the result of countless close calls, countless lucky breaks, Countless moments when things could have gone differently but did not. We are the survivors of a gauntlet that eliminated most of the humans who ever lived. We should be humble about our success and grateful for our existence. Now let me bring this long story toward its close, because the night is deep and sleep is calling, and there is only so much walking one can do before rest becomes necessary. The journey from Africa to everywhere took about 100,000 years, give or take. It involved countless individuals, countless generations, countless small decisions that cumulatively produced the greatest migration in the history of life on Earth. It transformed our species from a small population in one corner of one continent to the dominant life form on the planet, present on every landmass, adapted to every environment, numbering in the billions where once we numbered in the thousands. This transformation was not the work of heroes or geniuses, though there may have been heroes and geniuses among the travellers. It was the work of ordinary people doing ordinary things, walking, eating, sleeping, reproducing, raising children, passing on knowledge, living and dying as humans have always lived and died. The extraordinary emerge from the accumulation of the ordinary, as it always does, as it always will. You are the product of this journey. Every cell in your body carries DNA that has been shaped by 100,000 years of walking, of adapting, of surviving against the odds. Your ancestors walked out of Africa, across Asia, over the oceans, through ice ages and droughts and every other challenge the world could present. They did not give up. They did not stop. They kept going, step after step, generation after generation, until there was nowhere left to go. And now here you are, lying in the darkness, listening to their story, preparing for your own journey through another day. You carry their strength within you. You carry their resilience, their adaptability, their stubborn refusal to quit. Whatever challenges tomorrow brings, you're equipped to face them because you come from a line of people who faced far greater challenges and prevailed. The fire burns low now, as fires have burned low at the end of countless nights throughout human history. The stars wheel overhead, the same stars that guided your ancestors on their journeys, the same stars that will guide your descendants on journeys we cannot yet imagine. The world is quiet, waiting for the dawn, waiting for the walking to resume. But that is tomorrow. Tonight there is only rest. Tonight the journey pauses. Tonight you can let go of the walking and simply be still, simply be present, simply exist in this moment without worrying about the next step or the next mile or the next challenge. The ancestors have brought you this far. Trust them to watch over you through the night. Trust the journey to continue when you wake. Trust yourself to be equal to whatever comes next, because you are the inheritor of 100,000 years of human determination, and that inheritance does not fail. Sleep now, walker. Sleep, traveller. Sleep, child of those who walked from Africa to everywhere. Your journey continues in the morning. Your road stretches out before you, full of possibilities, full of challenges, full of wonders you have not yet discovered. But all of that can wait. All of it will still be there when you wake. For now, just sleep. Let the rhythm of the ancient journey carry you into dreams. Let the footsteps of your ancestors echo softly in your mind. A steady beat that has been sounding for 100,000 years and will continue sounding for as long as humans exist. You are part of that rhythm. You are part of that journey. You are part of something vast and ancient and ongoing. Something that connects you to everyone who has ever lived and everyone who ever will. Rest in that connection. Rest in that belonging. Rest in the knowledge that you are not alone, have never been alone, will never be alone. The human family walks together across time and space, from the beginning to the end of our story on this planet and beyond. Sleep well, beloved descendant of travellers. Sleep well, honoured ancestor of those yet to come. Sleep well, human being, walker of roads, crosser of boundaries, explorer of the unknown. The night holds you gently. The dawn awaits you patiently. And when you rise, the journey continues one step at a time, one day at a time, one life at a time, forever. Good night. Safe travels through the darkness, and when the light returns, rise and walk again, as your ancestors did, as your descendants will, as humans have always done and always will do, until the last of us takes the last step on the long road home. The road goes ever on, and we go with it, always. Good night.